Avery Howard here with Ravi Lulla to do a brief recap of the Michigan game and then look forward and preview the Illinois game. I know it's been almost a week ago since we watched Nebraska play Michigan. I'd ask for some thoughts, but I feel like we've discussed all week long, and more or less the attention now is kind of on how Rhule has challenged his team. From what you've heard from his press conferences this week, not only just from Coach Rhule, but some players and also some coordinators, what have been your feelings? What have been your reactions from hearing them speak?
Yeah, I mean, I really felt like Coach Rhule put his cards on the table this week with his team and kind of with the media, right? You don't say things like, hey, you're going to find out about us on Friday, you're going to find out about me on Friday, unless you're confident that your team's going to respond to that, right? That is, it does put a little pressure on you. It puts a little pressure on your team as well. If you don't think your team can respond to that, that's not something you probably put out there. So I thought that part of it was really interesting. And honestly, I'm kind of excited to see what it looks like because if they do respond the way that it seems like Coach Rhule thinks they will, that could be a really fun football team to watch. Now, listen, I don't think they're going to get real dynamic offensively probably at any point this year, but the way they, I think, are capable of playing defense can be a really exciting brand of football, especially if they're able to limit their turnovers on the offensive side of the ball so they keep putting their defense in good spots. The way that defense is capable of playing with some of the guys on that side of the ball, I think could be a ton of fun.
Yeah, we don't get to always hear the players speak with so much like vinegar and fire on a week-to-week basis, so I'm definitely looking forward to how that challenge is being accepted and received from the team. It seems like a good week of practice so far. If this game on Friday is a dominant win for Nebraska, do you think we can view this Michigan game as a good thing for this Nebraska squad?
Yeah, absolutely. I've kind of been thinking about it all week, and I've talked about it more in terms of that Sunday practice, but that Sunday practice doesn't happen without Michigan, right? Without what happened against the Wolverines. And so I think we could definitely look at this as a turning point, right? Because Nebraska didn't play up to their potential against Michigan. Was there a talent gap still? Absolutely, right? But it wasn't that Nebraska just got beat in every phase of the game. It's that they didn't really reach their potential in any phase of the game either. If you do that and you still come up short, I think Matt Rhule can live with that. What I don't think he can live with is consistently not performing up to your capabilities and not performing consistently as well. That's the other thing we really heard out of him was, hey, we want our guys to be the same guy every day. That's a huge thing, and it sounds so simple, but, man, is it not easy. Whether you're talking about Coach Rhule and just coaches being the same guy every day or the players or just regular life. It's really hard to bring that kind of consistency just to regular life, much less on a football field when you've got people actively trying to prevent you from doing that, right? So that's the other really interesting part for me. But I do think if Nebraska comes out and they've got an opportunity in front of them, not just Illinois, right? But the way the schedule sets up, they've got an opportunity to really redefine who they are, not just as a football team this year, but kind of start redefining who they are as a football program in year one under Matt Rhule. And if that happens, it's a big if still, right? But if that happens, I think we're going to look back at this Michigan game as the turning point. Talking
about challenges and opportunity this week, we've discussed how Coach Rhule has challenged his team. And we've discussed maybe it was a blanket statement because he said we have players in this team that need to show up. I saw them for Michigan because they were on the scout. I know their names and they performed to that level. It's time for these players on this roster to do that. Although we've discussed maybe that was just for all of his team to challenge him, who do you think maybe takes that step, maybe took it personally, and see them show up against Illinois this weekend? Yeah, I mean, I really think that while it probably was a challenge to everyone on the team, I bet there's a list of names that he's got, and he would never throw a guy under the bus like that. Yep. But I do think there's guys, because he mentioned, hey, there's guys with Sunday that are going to play on Sundays from this program that need to play like those guys. One that comes to mind, Quentin Newsome, right? I think he's been very solid this year. Hasn't really made that extra splash, spectacular, game-changing play for Nebraska. I think Isaac Gifford's kind of in that boat as well. He's a guy that, he got the ball cut off of his helmet against Michigan. You would have loved to see him be able to make a play on that, even though it's really challenging. He had that chance for an interception that would have ended the game against Minnesota. Yeah. Would have loved to see him make that play.
they're in positions. A lot of these guys are in positions to make these game-changing plays, and they haven't got there yet. I think Anthony Grant can be one of those guys. I think Thomas Fidone is 100% one of those guys. Now, his job's a little dependent on what the quarterback's doing, but Thomas Fidone is up there with the physical freaks of freaks on this team. There's and probably the most physically gifted guy on the offense in general. Going back to the defense side of the ball, Coach spoke about Prince Will.
Yeah.
Prince Will is a guy, as he moves from end to that jack linebacker spot, he's going to have to wreck some games, as Coach Rhule put it earlier in the week. Those are a handful of guys that I could see all those guys playing on Sundays. And if you're going to be a Sunday guy, you got to play like a Sunday guy before you get there.
Yeah.
And that's what Nebraska needs. Even if it's just those guys play the way I think they're capable of and the way I think Coach Rhule thinks they're capable of, this Nebraska team looks pretty dramatically different.
Yeah, there's also going to be some players in positions that haven't been playing so far this season. Also some players in the field that they haven't seen so far. One of those maybe being Jaden Doss on the field. Josh Fleek's in a different position. Cam Lenhart's back. Prince Will might be in a different position. From some of the changes and some of the returns, who are you most looking forward to watching this game?
Yeah, I love Cam Lenhart.
Yeah.
I was really high on him in the spring after I saw the spring game. I was really high on him before the season. And I don't think it's a coincidence at all that since he's been injured, they've had 0 sacks. I think part of that is what Tony White talked about earlier in this week, that maybe he wasn't aggressive enough with some of the plus pressures. But, man, a lot of that's because Cam Lenhart's not there, and he's one of the only guys that I think has consistently beat his matchup on the offensive line when he's been in there. So having him back, to me, is a huge step in the right direction for this Nebraska defense. On the offensive side of the ball, I really am interested to see how much Jaden Doss plays. It's a guy that we talked about quite a bit and that Coach Rhule talked about quite a bit before the season, before that injury occurred. I thought he was probably the freshman receiver that was furthest along and closest to contributing. Obviously, we haven't seen him yet. We've seen a little bit of Jalen Lloyd. We've seen a little bit of Malachi Coleman, who I think we're both going to see them this week as well. But I'm really interested to see what Jaden Doss, just how much he plays and if he's able to contribute immediately, because before the season, it sounded like they thought that was a possibility.
Yeah, so scouting Illinois moving to tomorrow's game on a Friday Night Lights. Some things that we've heard this week from the insider writers at Illinois, just mistakes, shooting themselves in the foot, getting the ball down the field, but not being able to complete in the red zone. Luke Altmaier puts it in the air, puts it in trouble. Interceptions, fumbles, lost the ball a few times. Also on the defensive side, they do rank last in a lot of areas on defense in the Big Ten. So when you look at this game on paper, we've discussed maybe a winnable game for Nebraska, but there haven't been many games in the last few years where it's like, oh, easy check mark for Nebraska, right? A lot of games are earned day by day, as Coach Rhule would say. And when you look at this game, although it may feel like a must-win for Nebraska, where do you see those advantages on the field, and where does Nebraska look to take a step up this weekend in this matchup? Yeah, for sure. So the big thing with Illinois for me is it is a lot of unforced errors for them in terms of where they struggled, because physically I don't think they're a ton different from Nebraska. I think they have a lot of similar talent in terms of you go position by position group. It's just that they haven't executed the way that A, they did last year, or B, you would like to think they're capable of this year if you're an Illinois fan or if you're Brett Bielema. So that makes them a little scary for me, because I do think they have the talent to hang with and beat Nebraska. Obviously, the mistakes at a certain point, as we've learned here in Nebraska, sometimes the mistakes become a part of your identity. I don't know if Illinois is at that point yet or not, but I do think they have the physical capabilities of hanging with or, beating Nebraska. It's a home game for them. I don't think that's out of the question. Like you said, Nebraska's lost the right to say, oh, that's a win, that's a win. You can look at it and say, winnable game. I don't think you can even say should win anymore. Nebraska's sort of lost that right, especially if you're talking about conference games, right? Yeah.
And so in terms of places where Nebraska can attack a vulnerable Illinois team, though, I really think the edge rushing game for Nebraska can be a place where they can make a lot of hay on Friday night. It is a place where Illinois has really struggled this year. Their discipline in terms of keeping assignments when there is any sort of inside fake and then an outside run. So you're talking zone reads, you're talking RPOs, you're talking traditional option plays. All of those have been a really big struggle for Illinois to cover this year. Now, the question is, with a quarterback in Heinrich Haarberg that hasn't always thrown the ball well, but I thought he did against Michigan. Will he throw the ball well enough to keep them honest and make that an even more challenging task for the Illinois defense? Because if he can do that, you look at games they struggled, especially Kansas and Toledo. Those teams really did a good job of not only getting to the edge outside on their rushing plays, but also giving a little bit of a passing threat to keep Illinois on their toes defensively. If Nebraska is able to sprinkle a little bit of that passing game success in there with that edge run and some of those reads, I think they could have a really good day offensively.
Yeah, when you look at Illinois lost a lot of players to the draft and their backfield, and also this seems like from discussions we've had all week, a lot of people seeing this as an opportunity for Nebraska's offense. How can they mix in the run game and also see if Heinrich can complete some more passes just with the deficiency that Illinois has in their defense? But that'll all be happening tomorrow night, Friday, 7 o'clock in Champaign. We'll be right here next week to recap a win or a loss and preview the next game the following week.
A Hurrdat Sports Network production.